Welcome to another episode of the SaaS Cast, the show that flips the traditional podcast format on its head. Here we have a simple rule, one question, one answer from some of the biggest names in the SaaS world. Today, we're thrilled to have the founder of Carbide on the show. They're an enterprise-class security platform that makes it easy to embed security and privacy into the DNA of every organization. It's a big mission, big vision. Darren, it's great to have you join us on the show today. You've built an incredible business in a really regulated, competitive, and hard to navigate sector. So I'd love to begin by hearing a little bit about yourself and your journey building the company so far.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on the show. Glad to be here. So I've got, I think, maybe a little less than traditional history in terms of how I got into building a cybersecurity company. I started my career as a musician in my early 20s. That transitioned to being a recording engineer and producer. In other words, sort of migrating from being on the road and playing live a lot to actually working with other artists and helping them build their recordings. That evolved into effectively really just doing that full time, which turned into me starting my own label with a partner down in New York. We ended up becoming distributed in EMI with EMI Canada and a few other labels in other countries in the world. And of course, the music industry really got hit pretty hard in mid-2000s and certainly again then in 2007 as the economic downturn. We had Napster rolling out. The value of records really took a spin down the toilet bowl. And our partners, our record partners, just the whole environment changed. I didn't really see how I was going to make my original business plan operate. Things weren't going super well. And we were doing a lot of cool stuff with technology as a record label that I think was pretty odd at that time, like going back to 2005, 2006, 2007. Like we were using Basecamp very seriously back in the day. People weren't using the word cloud, and SaaS was not a very common thing. People would ask, like, where's the data? It's like, it's in a server in another state somewhere. In a time where a lot of people...
Or in this room beside me.
In this server under my bed, no.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was really cool. Like for me, like music really brought me to technology, because when I started getting into producing music, this was really at the point where a lot of people were making that transition from analog, tape recordings and stuff to doing things digitally. And I love the digital recording, and being the type of person that, like, I didn't want to use a computer unless I understood the computer. So it really brought me like deep into the tech behind the tech. And so, yeah. And as a label, we love trying to figure out new ways of doing things. And we were really obsessed with like SaaS type technology and, really leveraging that. So, as I was kind of seeing the demise of the record industry and really questioning my life decisions around starting a record label, I had this great idea around, like, what if we sold technology specific? Like, and initially it was like, well, Basecamp is kind of a generic sort of like platform, right? It's not really specifically made for, any type of agency. In fact, if anything, it was more like an agency doing like design shop or stuff like that. So we were kind of like using it in a bit of a context. So I had this idea of building a platform with that sort of idea of making things more efficient for the music industry. And where we really focused was in the music festival space, because we felt like just the logistics of putting on a festival, you've got like a whole year to plan a festival, and then everything happens in 3 days, and it's absolute chaos all the time, no matter how organized the festival may or may not be. And it was, it was a niche product in a very niche industry. We didn't raise a lot of capital. It wasn't really a venture backable business. So we didn't really take any like traditional institutional capital per se. But we built a profitable business. And, by 2015, 2016, we were being used by Coachella and Burning Man and Bonnaroo and other cultural events like Just for Laughs, and even some sporting events like X Games. And, it was a really wild ride. But what we noticed is as we got into the later stage of that business and our feature set started requiring us to store, process, like more information, a lot of confidential information. As we started working with enterprise organizations like Disney and Live Nation and AEG, the security requirements and concerns that they had started to mature pretty quickly. And that put a lot of pressure on us. So we were really getting forced to tighten up our security from confidentiality, from integrity and availability perspective, We had to go through a SOC 2. I think we did that in 2015. We ended up putting an ISO program in effect. And near the end, before that company was acquired, it was right on the onset of GDPR. And so we had to go through the process of navigating GDPR because we were in 23 different countries around the world. A lot of them were in Europe. So, just like that's how I got introduced to security. And for us, it quite frankly just really became something that initially was a pain in the ass. And then it was something that we figured out a really good way to do an actual strong security program. We started to take it very seriously. But then we even saw it as a competitive advantage towards some of the little ankle biter competitors that were popping up in the market that didn't have the insight on how important the trust element was becoming. And we doubled down on it. I ended up doing a CISSP certification, and we ended up really, really tightening up. We built a really awesome security report and like trust report and all this kind of stuff. And this was when a lot of companies, certainly SaaS companies, weren't really taking this stuff seriously. So that's how I kind of navigated from being a musician to a music entrepreneur to a music tech entrepreneur. And then, of course, it was kind of, I was looking for something bigger. I wanted to build a bigger company in a bigger space. And I really saw the writing on the wall in terms of what the impacts of all these data privacy regulations, seeing the increase in the velocity of increase in the hacking world. Like it's effectively was becoming the new go-to, money grab in the black market for illegal activity. You're less likely to get caught hacking some business with a crypto locker than you were trying to cross the border with a bunch of bags of cocaine in your luggage. So it just became a really obvious scenario that, wow, hackers are making money. Everybody's moving to cloud. This is all going to happen, and then regulation's going to jump in, and everybody's going to get reactive, and then trust is going to be the big thing. And of course, I got that part right. We're definitely seeing that in the world, but that's how I went from playing drums in a band to being the CEO of a cybersecurity data privacy company.
I love it. It's both creative and an element of high regulation and selling into a core area of a business around security is not an easy thing. So I'm sure the showmanship and all your years spent in music learning about the art of performance and storytelling really helped humanize an area as hard to talk about, right? Because again, if you're talking about security, it's either something happened in most cases, or you're trying to decide what to do after it's happened. And maybe that alludes to the question that I have for you. There's like this, big debate in tech circles, and I'll even say by the role in which you ask within the tech community, whether you integrate and embed security first, or is security an afterthought? And so, from your experience, someone that's lived this day in and day out, what are each approach's inherent risks and rewards from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that most SaaS companies think about it as an after effect. It's like build something.
Yeah.
And the mentality always has been like build quick, build it fast, MVP, just get stuff out there, prove the concept, and then clean up the mess later. So I get that mentality, and that's certainly what I did in my last company. The challenge with that, and this was a challenge that cost us heavily in my last company, is if you spend 5 or 6 years building technology and you build it in a not so secure way, you make really not necessarily the best architectural decisions or product decisions or how you go about things, and you're totally oblivious to data security, data privacy, you can certainly end up in a situation that where it's not going to be just flick a few switches to solve the problem. And that was certainly what happened with us in our last company. Like when I remember we got our first pen test, and there was a lot of findings. Now I will say, the quality of most modern dev stacks nowadays, there's a lot of stuff that can be baked in the box, depending on how you build your tech stack and whatnot. Back in 2010, 2011, there was very little coming out of the box for you. You were really kind of left to your own resources, certainly on the security side. So, but we had, and that was the problem we ran into. We had a lot of challenges in our application from a security perspective that required us to build things over and upgrade things and change the way we're doing things. So we ended up in a period of time of about 6 to 8 months where we really didn't have the resources to spend on increasing, improving features and doing what customers are requesting us to do. We had to do all the stuff that they can't see that we needed to do to make sure that we're not exposing them, right? So that's the big downside of bolting it on after the fact. The other big downside of doing that is when you go in looking for those first customers, like when you're not thinking about security and it's obvious and you don't have the knowledge to talk about it, you're starting a conversation off. You're already starting the conversation off with a low trust score because it's like, who are you? You're a new company. You don't really have customers. You don't really have revenue, right? It's a leap of faith to get somebody to trust you. But going in there without having sophistication around your ability to respond to questions about data security and architectural security, your application, your software, etc., it's not a great look. And it's more and more of a thing. And we hear the term now more and more often about security and privacy by design and by default. So, I would argue, and we still see this all the time, I would argue that, yes, I get it, you need to move quick, but I would say you don't have to build the top secure application from day one. I'm not saying that, but if you can just have some lunch and learns about security and set some pretty high level policies or standards that you operate on, it's and the accessibility of tool is now, like you can get vulnerability scanners for next to nothing that are pretty high quality that can scan externally or credential wise, just to put that in part of your testing. Think about security and privacy when you're scoping new features. Like, it's amazing. Like, see people like, hey, we launched this new feature. It's like, holy shit. Do you realize the exposure that this new feature, like now you went from storing this class of confidentiality to like, now you're talking like you're going to turn this on and all your customers are going to ideally jump for this product, but like, look at the exposure you're creating, right? So did you think about that? Did you look at that from a security perspective? And so yeah, I think the lunch and learns, adopting some coding best practices, some cloud configuration best practices, getting into the habit of keeping your dev stack up to date. Don't allow things to lapse to the point where, we haven't done an update in a year and now we can't just do an update. We have to, there's actual work involved in modifying the way things work or changing some code to do that. So I would argue that having some degree of security thoughtfulness and education from day one is going to, in the mid to long term, help you speed up. And then the other factor that I would think about in terms of how far you go with that is like, from the customer that you're proposing you're going to sell to and what you're going to do from them, how are they going to look at you from a risk perspective? Because that's also going to determine the degree of, how lenient they may or may not be in terms of your security posture. If you're a low risk vendor, just by the nature of the amount of data or the degree of integrity requirement or availability required, if you're a lower risk vendor, then the questions are, and the degree at which they'll look at your security posture is going to be different than if you're going to be connecting to a bank in America and you're going to instantly have, millions of records and things like that, right? So, understanding what your customer's expectation is and understand how they're going to look at you selling your ideal, positioning yourself in their business. How are they going to look at that from a supply chain risk perspective?
Yeah, it's always a hard debate, and I think you've really articulated both sides of it. And I really actually, the one that you just mentioned about target market was the one that was always top of mind. It's like nothing worse than getting almost to the finish line of a deal to find out you didn't make it because of a security or the infrastructure provider that you chose. One other quick question for you. Where do you see more risk? Do you see it on the infrastructure side or do you see it on the application level side? If you were to out of 100, what would be the delineation between the two?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at risk, generally speaking, is like you're really only as good as your weakest link. So I think it depends. Like, it depends on the type of application and what that stack looks like. On an infrastructure side, like, I think it's very wise to pick your infrastructure very wisely because you can get wins. Like, you can actually take components of the equation and defer that off and not worry about that. Well, you still have to do your vendor due diligence on the vendor. You have to make sure that you're using the toolage properly. But like, I always tell people, like, when you're partnering with infrastructure, like, look at their shared responsibility model. Like, what are you getting here from a security perspective? And then that kind of that gives you the opportunity to take certain components of this and push that off to the companies that you're partnering with, and then at least understand what your responsibility is on the infrastructure. So, failed infrastructure, poor infrastructure security can result in serious data breaches, but so can crappy code or poor testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. They're equally as important. I think from my experience, I've kind of found the cobbler's shoes for a SaaS company in many ways is the infrastructure, just by design, to your point. Move fast, find product market fit, ship as many MVPs as possible. But then there's always this inflection point, and it's hard to equate whether or not doing it before or after is right. It's just, if you're going to be in that scale up phase, there's nothing worse than putting in a fire that's distracting you from the next big opportunity that you should be focused on.
I think there's a hybrid, and it comes back to understanding what the expectations are, understanding what the bar needs to look like, and then just making a conscious decision of, okay, well, we're going to do this now. Like, let's make sure we follow good coding practices. Let's make sure that we make good infrastructural decisions. Let's make sure we architect intelligently and be mindful. And you can still decide, hey, maybe there's a certain component of where ideally we want to be from a security perspective that we are going to put off. But when you just naively ignore the whole topic, you don't really know what you don't know. And so, like, if you end up in the situation like we did at that time, where we are in a situation where we had a lot of customers asking for a lot of things, and it was an ideal time for us to be shipping features. We weren't shipping features. We were shipping things that were invisible to the customer, but that were critical for us to get the security clearance or security, the security posture in terms of the application infrastructure that we needed.
Yeah. And again, I think this, like, if you think about the investment, right, it's another core reason to believe for your organization, right? Postures you differently, definitely builds trust and credibility, to anchors for any, new client that's going to join your company, investors, all of those types of different modalities. Final question, with organizations like MedStack, right, that offer HIPAA compliant environments, and, I'm sure there's more that are out there that are similar in nature. They've found, a niche, which, there's a whole bunch of health tech companies that are sprouting up, and HIPAA's hard to get compliant. So we'll just, build a solution on top of Azure, charge a premium, and in a day you can be HIPAA compliant. What's your thoughts on, tools and platforms that get you there really quickly, but may cost you more in the end? I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, the first side of it is when you look at something like HIPAA, for example, the security rule is one of the rules, but there's a lot of other components. And what I find, some of the challenges I find, and we've dealt with companies that are on various different platforms, where the platform is like, hey, this is going to get you compliant. This is going to get you compliant. And this tool is going to do the hard parts. And it's like, well, what concerns me there is sometimes there's some snake oil there, because the reality is, well, it's not always the infrastructure that's the hard part. It really depends on what you're building, how you're building it. There's also a lot of administrative control requirements, and there's a lot of process, and there's a lot of educational requirements. So, I think the reality is, there's definitely these tools out there that can help. And again, it comes back to what we said earlier. Like, if there's parts of this equation that you can offload to a vendor, then that is going to be beneficial for you in all likelihood. To some point, there may be a point where there may be a point in scale in your business where you're going to want to have more control over the situation, but there's more to it than that. Like, sometimes we work with customers, they're surprised, like they throw their CTO in there, and then it's like, well, we're going to have to, there's all this stuff you need to do that's related to governance. There's all this stuff you need to do related to privacy. There's all this stuff you need to do like policies and procedures and controls and control mapping. There's a lot of HR onboarding and offboarding and awareness training, and there's just a lot of things. There's a lot of things you need to put in place that aren't really that technical. And sometimes people are like, well, why are we doing all this? Well, because you have to, right? Like, what's the point of having a good application?
There's obviously some business value, right? Whether that's unlocking your next client or protecting your business against threat and risk. I think those are the apparent ones. I think actually that's a great point. Knowing investing into a platform like this, what's the return on investment? What do people see from investing into your platform? Those that are kind of doing it first, if you have any of those use cases.
Yeah, I mean, when I see companies come to us that have where they have a platform or an architecture solution where they don't have to go through and manage all that configuration.
Uh-huh.
It's certainly it's beneficial to us in one sense, because it means, well, we're not gonna we're not gonna have to help them with that problem, and
Yeah.
if they've chose their vendor well, that's one box that we hope is checked. We still need but unfortunately, a lot of times they're not. So it's like, well, you still need to code securely. You still need to test your code. You still need to, and that's there's still work to be done. And I think, the value proposition that I feel that our customers experience is, as they're going through their journey, growing their customer base, maybe moving up market or just expanding both the feature set and the customer profile, is that as more and more standards and more requirements come down the pipeline, what we're able to do with them is give them a single set of policies, a single set of controls that map across a variety of data privacy regulations and a lot of security standards and frameworks. So they can very quickly analyze their posture compared to whatever benchmark is critical for that particular customer. And where the efficiency comes is having segregated programs like that's not really manageable. Like it's likely, if let's say you start selling in Canada and you're selling a healthcare or a med tech product, you have different requirements in each province. It's kind of a bit of a hot mess, and how each province manages that. And then you go down the States, you've got the HIPAA compliance equation. If you're going into Europe, GDPR has coverage when it comes to healthcare and classifies that as a certain degree of PII. And every place in the world has their own flavor, right? There's a lot of shared principles and best practices there, but you want to be able to have one program. Like, you're a SaaS company, you can't have like a compliance department, and you can't have five different technologies that manage different subsets of controls. That's just like, that becomes like heavily very red tape. So that consolidation and understanding, again, it all comes back to risk, and most of the standards and frameworks and a lot of the regulations comes back to risk. Like, you need to understand your risk, you need to have a risk management platform, in place in the business, and that can help you understand like the things you need to do well and the things you may be able to get by without doing, or can do it at a much lighter intensity, and you can validate that through understanding and practical, correction of actual risks.
Gotcha. And so, Darren, if any of our listeners who are tuning in right now, if they wanted to, find your company online or reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm on there. I'm checking it at least once every day or two. So if anybody has any reason they want to hit me up there, and I'll get back to you within a day or two. And then, if you're more interested in learning more about the company, just go to carbidesecure.com. And there's tons of information about what we do there.
Amazing. Well, Darren, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing kind of some of your perspective on security first or as an afterthought. I think it's a great, healthy debate that will continue much more into the future, probably never stop, but good recommendations and thoughts and perspectives from you were shared today. So thank you again for your time. We'll be cheering you along the sidelines on your next round of growth as you scale and keep on building the company.
Awesome. I appreciate it.